The United States is an empire going down. I wish I didn't have to say that to you, but it's the truth. And we can't pretend it, although we surely do try, to get away from that. We can't compete. The best, cheapest electric car in the world is made by a Chinese corporation. Over the last 20 years, all the car companies tried as best they could, spending a fortune to become the best and the first to make an electric car. Mr. Musk was the first, and therefore he's so rich. But he's been bypassed. The Chinese have outdone him. By the way, he's no longer the #1 electric car seller in China. That's been taken over by Chinese companies, BYD company in particular. Solar panels are the same. All kinds of chips are the same. The DeepSeek AI mechanism is the same.
Yesterday, Xi Jinping, the head of the government in China, announced that the 53 countries of Africa will be allowed to export to China with 0 tariffs on any of them, on any product, at any time. That's a milestone. Look at the meaning. The United States, after it deals with China, and after it deals with Russia and South Korea and Japan, will turn its attention, who knows when, to Africa, upon whom the United States has hit enormous tariffs, 30%, 40%, 50% on small African countries, that you have to shake your head in disbelief. So the United States is deeply threatening the economic viability of African countries by imposing enormous tariffs, at the same time that China removes all tariffs for the African. For those who don't know, China has been a more important trading partner for Africa for the last 15 years. It's much more important for Africa to trade with China than it is for Africa to trade with the United States. And all that this shows is that relationship is getting stronger and bigger and more important, both for China and for Africa, and the United States is simply becoming increasingly less relevant. No one should be surprised then when a few days earlier, the American military general in charge of the Africa Command makes comments suggesting that the Africa Command of the American military is a failure. I don't know exactly what that word means, but I get the message. And it's not because the United States military didn't do the right thing or the wrong thing. It's the development that I've just described, say, between Africa and China, that erodes from underneath. No military question really needs to be asked. It's already answered by the fact that everything is realigning in the world in such a way as to resolve all kinds of matters by the flow of economic development, regardless of what is done politically or militarily. I don't want to overstate this. The military and the political are important and have their influence. But I think in this case, the stalemates that we talk about militarily and politically will likely be resolved by an economic development that is no stalemate at all. And you could see that in the London meetings over the weekend between the United States and China, in which there's lots of spinning. But the bottom line looks like the United States had to give in order to get something and didn't come out with any kind of new world order that is any different from the one in which the United States is losing.
Hello and what's up, wonderful people. I hope you're doing great from wherever you're watching this video from, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back for another video. Now, in this video, I want us to talk about and concentrate on the relationship between the African continent, the various 54 countries that make up the African continent, and the United States of America, this strained relationship. And quite evidently, in the recent past, we can, say for a fact that the relationship, not just the relationship, but also the influence that America has had on the continent of Africa has not just been diminishing, but quickly fleeting. This is because of some critical strategic poor decisions by successive American governments on dealing with the African countries. And this is obviously drawing comparisons to different countries, different global powers like China and most recently Russia. And while everybody is looking towards the African way, causing and warming up to Africa, the United States of America, who are still in their dreamland, dreaming about their global hegemony and paternalistic uh, relationship that they once had, bullying their way into everybody's affair, they are not willing to accept that the world is changing. There is a new world order. There is new global power, and the strategy needs to change. They're not willing to come to the table um, with mutual respect, with mutual benefits for all the players. Now, there's this video I came across by Richard Wolff, a very interesting, a very well enlightening video. I want us to watch this video, and at the end of this video, I'm going to give you, in my own analysis, the reasons why Africa is not just waiting for the future, but is actually the future, and the future is now. Let's watch this video keenly and let's learn from it, and I'll see you at the end of this video.
And when Michael said quite correctly that the Vietnam War taught the United States the lesson of how dangerous it would be for the U.S. to try to mobilize hundreds of thousands of troops from American people, let's remember the war was incredibly expensive. They made the mistake. The war came to an end because of the opposition at home, and the United States lost the war. The Communist Party of Vietnam was the enemy, and the Communist Party of Vietnam runs that society politically now. They won. We lost, and we discovered that if you're not careful, you'll lose the war at home, whether or not you're doing better or worse on the battlefield over there. This was very, very powerful and has affected our military and is behind half of what goes on that they will never tell you about, because even the admission that they lost the war in Vietnam is difficult for them, not for anyone else in the world, but for them. And look, Mr. Trump's attack on the world by imposing tariffs on everybody makes the rest of the world very much able, no matter how sleazy their politicians might be, they're all in a position now to do something that has more than a grain of truth, to blame whatever the economic problems are of their country on the United States. You have positioned yourself as the big bad herder. You're the one who's hurting their exports, their imports, their balance of payments, their gold holdings, whatever the hell it is. There's a logical link of that to the tariffs and all of that. Look, there's a new leader of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, just announced. Okay, the new leader does what the old leader did. We like Trump. Oh, yes, tax cuts are wonderful. But you know this stuff about tariffs? Awful. They don't want these tariffs. And why is that important? Because the business community of America will go along with everything Michael just said about the American government, as long as it doesn't look like they're going to lose. Because at that point, it's not attractive anymore. Mr. Trump better be very, very careful. Running after the fantasy of the State Department, as he described it, is all well and good until it isn't. And when it doesn't work, when it's beginning to cost, then the questions will be raised. My goodness, just as now, the questions will be raised, not by people who are against what his policies on immigrants. They don't care. They're not against deporting. They don't care. But if you can't function in downtown Los Angeles because of the policy, then they care. That they do not want. That's disruptive to business, to commerce, to tourism. They don't want any of that. That's a problem. And that's a problem you should have understood you could be worsening by the very policies that you're pursuing. There is no evidence that the Russians are facing a situation that would require them to do what the fantasy Michael just described would have them do. Throw in the towel, give up the fight. Not at all. There's nothing. There's no evidence at all. The right wing is correct in this country that the Russians continue to fight the war, that absolutely nothing you have done to them has led them to come to the table. The only really interesting thing is, if putting tanks where you hadn't put them, putting F-16s where you hadn't put them, whether raising the sanctions. By the way, the latest European sanction package is called package number 18. That's because 17 previous ones did not work. But there's an old joke. You keep doing the same thing, hoping for a different result, suggests that you're not sane anymore. So here's the reality. In Europe, after 1945, and up to this minute, every active politician learned, if he or she didn't know it before, that the way to go up the career ladder in the governments of Europe was to be known to befriend the United States, to be pro-American, to be eager to accommodate the superpower. And every politician who didn't get that memorandum was pushed aside, often by the United States, who made it crystal clear, we don't like this one, we don't want that one, we're not happy with this one. That's how it worked. When you read now about the behavior of the woman American diplomat who put Mr. Zelensky into power, that was not unusual that an American diplomat, an ambassador, she's not unusual, she's not distinctive. There's nothing interesting or exceptional about her, including dismissing the Europeans. Who cared about them? That's what she's famous for. But she only said out loud what everyone knew. Why am I telling you this? Because the leaders of Europe today, Starmer, Macron, Merz, that's who they are. They have built their careers. They have spent the last 30, 40, 50 years building a career around being the patsy for the United States. That's who they know. That's where their self-image comes from. They're not going to turn against the United States because they've gotten to the position they have precisely because they were the most acceptable to the United States. No one should be surprised by this. Of course, that's where they go. And if there is a moment when unusual American leader like Trump questions what's going on, it's going to take some time before others who question like Trump displace this generation of European leaders who are simply carrying out what they developed. It reminds me of a famous cartoon I used to see in the movies. And there's an image of a duck running off the edge of a cliff. And it gets to the edge and it keeps on running for another few minutes before it looks down and realizes there's no cliff anymore, and then it drops like a stone. You are going to see in Europe over the next months and years the steady, slow disappearance of the U.S. pandering European political elite. And they're going to be replaced by people who see the world differently and who reject a future because it's not looking very good for them. And like the duck running off the edge, they can't stand looking down because if they do, they will see that the United States, to whom they are showing their good obedience, isn't there anymore, has turned and left and is looking at them as if they were the patsies that they always were. There is no greater hatred than that of the master who no longer leads the slave and needs to get rid of that slave and has to come up with an excuse and not understand how much the slave did for them. The Middle East has been and is now a stalemate. And here's what I mean. For much of the last century, the Middle East was the playground for foreign powers that invaded and took over in order to control oil. That was the issue. That was the goal. That was the program. Literally, a number of the countries there were created as countries They weren't countries when all of this started. They were created later, and the single dominant theme of their creation, of the literal formation out of a desert population of a quote-unquote nation, was designed and orchestrated in Europe and in North America, where these things were done. Now, several events have made this story no longer valid. Number one is the rising up of the Arab and related peoples in that part of the world who have fought and overcome their colonial situations, at least politically, not quite economically, but politically. That's one new factor. Number two, the overwhelming use of Israel by the West as its outpost, focusing everybody's attention on the Arab-Israeli contradiction and conflict, allowing the Western powers to continue to get from the Middle East what they needed, so long as the Arab population was focused on Israel, which was merely the symbolic forerunner of what was really going on. And then finally, the new situation, the decline of the Western Empire, the United States, and the rise especially of China, and secondarily now of Russia as China's ally. Russia being right up against the Middle East, bordering some of the countries there and close to them in many other historical ways. So now you have a stalemate. There's still enormous influence from the United States and Western Europe, focused still, by the way, on oil more than anything else, with a secondary support of Israel, but that is derivative about the oil anyway. And no one knows quite what to do. The Arabs are demanding a rising power and influence in the area, which their numbers alone support and justify. It is, after all, their part of the world by any reasonable understanding of how geography and populations work. The West is powerful in holding on, but the West is holding on to what is ultimately a declining situation for them. And that's not even taking account of the fact that fossil fuels will be phased out eventually, even though one has to be struck by the ability of the West to continue to hold on to as much importance for oil as their economic investment requires them to do. Okay, nothing can change here now. The contradictions are too many and too complicated. And you can see that by the inability of the world to do anything confronted by what is the sharpest point of that contradiction, which is the Israeli bombing of the people of Gaza. Everyone in the world, the overwhelming majority, have a position on that, and the position is anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian. The votes in the United Nations show that. I mean, there are a number of votes in which it's the entire world on one side and Israel and the United States on the other. I mean, one could not have a more dramatic demonstration of a stalemate because the bombing goes on. Nothing is in a position to act definitively to stop it. So we have a war that's now going on and on and on. And people are talking about removing an entire population. I mean, it's extraordinary. And the second example is Iran. You can't do anything. The Iranians have very powerful relationships developed now over many years with both China and Russia. There's even a formal mutual defense agreement between Russia and Iran. If you attack Iran, where does that go? Israel would like to do it because Israel's only hope in the long run is to draw the United States in much more than it is willing to go in there and support them. Otherwise, at some point, and I'm not the only one who says this, the United States will take a new look at Israel and do to Israel what it has done elsewhere when it isn't anymore workable. Look at the noise being made over Ukraine. And the rest of Europe is supporting Ukraine despite America walking away. They don't feel that way about Israel. There'll be less opposition if the United States walks away from Israel. So these are incredible tensions, but they are contradictions in a sense that nobody dares move. I can tell when what we're being told is quickly manufactured spin, as we call it in the U.S. That's what we're subject to. It's very hard to get beyond that because so much information is withheld and so much information is phonied intentionally that we're left with a limit to what we can say.
The United States is an empire going down. I wish I didn't have to say that to you, but it's the truth. And we can't pretend it, although we surely do try, to get away from that. We can't compete. The best, cheapest electric car in the world is made by a Chinese corporation. Over the last 20 years, all the car companies tried as best they could, spending a fortune to become the best and the first to make an electric car. Mr. Musk was the first, and therefore he's so rich. But he's been bypassed. The Chinese have outdone him. By the way, he's no longer the #1 electric car seller in China. That's been taken over by Chinese companies, BYD company in particular. Solar panels are the same. All kinds of chips are the same. The DeepSeek AI mechanism is the same. And we could go on. Yesterday I saw a whole video devoted to the unmanned air taxis that they have now produced in 2 or 3 Chinese cities. I mean, all of that's coming to the United States sooner or later. It's going around the world. If the United States walls itself off, we will be the laughingstock of the world as the rest of the world advances with the technology coming out of China, and we sit there unable to move because even our technology will not survive because it will be outdone in terms of the Chinese and therefore have no foreign market. All of these are signs on the wall that the rest of the world is reading. And the United States has to do something to deal with this. If it stays with an open world economy, it means the United States is going to have to adjust to that world economy, adjust to not being #1 in it, adjust to the fact that the US dollar will not be what it has been for 75 years. It'll lose some of its value, maybe a lot of its value, and that'll make our import more expensive. A lot of adjustments, and many of them costly. And we know, or we should, that when you have a period of adjustment in an economy, the people at the top, the richest, the most powerful, the CEOs, are in the best position to hold on to their wealth while the adjustment becomes a problem for everybody else. But here in America, that is very dangerous politics. That's the end of the middle class. That's the immiseration of the working class for an unknown length of time. It's already been going on for 20 years. That's why Mr. Trump gets elected, because things, even in America, are unsettled and worrisome and frightening people. And they look at the conventional Democrats and Republicans, and that's what they get, conventional. But conventional has turned sour for the United States. It isn't the top dog anymore. And what you're getting now is the defensive crouch, the wall off the people of Central America, wall off the rest of the world. Listen to Mr. Trump. The whole world has been cheating us. You know, if you go to a clinic, they'll call that paranoia. This is a problem. You are reacting to a difficult situation, not by trying to sit down with your competitors and work something out, but by imagining you can wall yourself off from the world. It's not going to work. It never has worked with countries just as powerful as the United States. The British Empire in its day was unmatched in human history. They thought they would last forever. England is now a small, wet, offshore island of Europe. And that's what it was centuries ago. And that's what it is returning to. And all of its navy and all of its power and its victory over Napoleon, you know, that's the way it is. And that's what's happening to us. And that's very difficult. I'm compassionate with my fellow Americans. There's no fun going through a decline like this. But you don't make it better by pretending it didn't happen or isn't going on. Mr. Trump is a bloviator. He's going to tell you dramatic, what the bottom line, he's desperate. And his desperation is dangerous. I find it mind-bendingly terrifying to think that the United States imagines that it is going to come out of a war with China allied to Russia. I mean, we have a population of 330 million. Russia and China have together 4 to 5 times that population and a much bigger geography. They cover more land and they have 5 times the number of people. And they both have nuclear weapons, lots of them, and a big army. And here's a big difference between the 30s and now to keep in mind. Over the last 40 years, the United States has dismantled its industrial capacity. It has focused itself on producing and distributing financial services of all kinds and are doing a lot with high tech, Silicon Valley and all of that. And that has kept it going. And most important, the world has financed the United States. All those rich people I talked about before parking their money here. That's why their money is here. Foreign governments, including Russia and China, keeping their wealth in the United States, which was taken from, or Europe, was taken from them in the war with Ukraine in the case of Russia. So they kept their wealth here. We benefited from all of that. None of that is true anymore. China has the great capacity for manufacturing. If you're going to start to produce for war in a major way, they're going to outproduce us. They're going to outproduce us with drones and missiles and planes, because they have all that. We don't have what we once had. They do. Partly they do because we moved American companies over there or European companies over there. And they're very aware of that advantage. That was their strategy. That's what they pursued. The United States is not in a position, unless it is going to risk self-destruction, which maybe it will. It's been done before. Look, the war in Ukraine should be a wake-up call. Don't let it be otherwise. The United States intended to win that. Everything done for the last 10 years in that poor, poor country. The Maidan Revolution, the coup d'etat, the separating them away from Russia, the attempt to bring them into NATO. I mean, it's really straightforward, pretty obvious. And when the war begins, when Russia invades, Mr. Biden and Mr. Blinken telling us Russia would come to its knees, the ruble would collapse. It's all wrong. None of that happened. And the Russians every week move further west and take another chunk of Ukraine under their control. That war is being lost, dramatically lost. And as the New York Times said a couple of weeks ago, when it had a remarkable article that people should read, in which it documents in detail how at every step of that war, American technicians, American military personnel did the intelligence, did the reconnaissance, did the strategic planning, selected the targets, enabled the missiles to be shot. I mean, this has been a war between the United States and Russia, referred to as a proxy war, which it pretty much was. But one side lost and one side won. And the reason the Russians won was their reliance with China and India, no question. Even the Russians admit it, they don't deny it. So, I mean, look at the situation. Even if you think about war, which Americans seem to imagine, they're just going to win. We lost the war in Vietnam. We lost the war in Afghanistan. We lost the war in Iraq, and we're losing in Ukraine. What kind of a country plans for war with a record like that? This is not the time for war. This is the time for every other conceivable effort. And to give Mr. Trump his due, he kind of sees it in Ukraine. It's kind of, he's given up the ghost there, slowly, painfully, worried about how it'll play in the American public and what his political enemies will do with him. But he's getting out of there because if there's anything crazier than planning for a war with China, it's trying to plan for a war with China while you're losing one in Ukraine. I mean, it's so crazy that even a Mr. Trump can see that's got to stop. That's a no-brainer. You know, if you're still living in the 1980s and 90s, when the United States was still the top dog, when not only was it the top dog, but the Soviet Union imploded so it couldn't be even the counterweight that it had been, wow, then maybe you could think like that. That's where Mr. Blinken still is. That's where Mr. Biden still is. Mr. Trump is able to go beyond. But I'll give him that. He sees that, to his credit. But the rest of it is a megalomaniac notion of what the United States is in a position to do. And let me take it one step further. If I'm right, as I suspect I am, if this is going to work out really badly, that these tariff wars and trade wars and capital wars end up the kind of failure that the war in Ukraine is turning out to be, you're going to see the world and much of the United States turn against Mr. Trump in a spectacular reversal that will be as dramatic, if not more so, than watching him rise to the top, will be watching him crash when this desperation doesn't work. So what's happening is, bottom line, the rest of the world is watching what they believe to be desperate acts. The United States cannot compete its way out of the world economy, so it has to shut the world out. It has to close in on itself with a tariff barrier. It's like building a wall, and it's very symbolic. The wall against the immigrants in the southern border, now the wall against the whole world with the tariffs. This is looked upon by the rest of the world as an admission of failure. And by the way, it's clear in the rest of the world that it's failure in competition with China. And that reputational damage means that all the wealthy of the world are saying to themselves, we're not going to leave the United States, but we're reducing the portion of our wealth that's over there in the United States because it's too risky. And we're going to move out of the United States into less risky assets in other parts of the world. And that's the only way to explain that if you take a look, as I did yesterday, at the movement of the US dollar from January 20, when Mr. Trump becomes president, to April 18th, that's the numbers I looked at just a few days ago, the dollar lost almost 10% of its value. That's because people are unloading it. And when I say people, I mean also rich Americans are being told by their advisors, do not put as many eggs in the American basket as you used to do, as we used to tell you to do. Now we're telling you there's too much risk. You better buy euros or Japanese yen or Chinese yuan because the United States' position is deteriorating. You know, we've been saying this on this program for some time. What you're now beginning to see is the accelerated evidence that that's happened.
All right, welcome back after watching that very eye-opening and informative video by Richard Wolff. And what we can generally say is that the United States of America have been so used to the strategy, their bullying strategy, that they are not ready to not understand, but to accept. Those are two different things. Because it's not that they don't know, but they are too bossy, too proud to accept that we have been challenged, and a hegemonistic kind of relationship cannot work, but one of mutual benefit and mutual respect can work. And even if you were to use your underhand tactics, you cannot just make them clear as clear as daytime that you're going to bully your way into any people's affairs like they have always been doing in the past. Because we know that for the past decades, if not hundreds of years, the United States has relied on underhand, uncouth tactics, like, for example, manufacturing conflicts and wars. So through that, then they can siphon resources and get their interest first in regions, in countries, in different places. But now everybody has woken up to that reality, and everybody is challenging that, and with especially growing powers to the east. Now everybody can seek friendships, uh, partners, business partners from the other side, and leave alone the one that is exploitative. And even though nobody really loves Africa than Africans would ever do, nobody has the interest, utmost interest of Africa at their hearts other than we, the African and black people. But at least we can say so and so is exploitative, and so we don't want to work with this, and so, but so and so is one that comes to the table with mutual respect for each other and for our sovereignty. So we are willing to work with them. Now, I was just making my own little analysis on why Africa is actually the future, and why everybody should now be, if really you're thinking about your global status in the near future, then you have to understand that these factors are what make Africa stand out as the future of the globe. One of them is the youthful population. And we're talking about, no, we're not talking about population, we're talking about the youthful population. And for your information, about 60% of the African population is under 25 years. Under 25 years. That's a huge, huge, big population of young people that the world needs to get going. It's projected that in 2050, as I was looking into analysis, in 2050, 1 out of every 4 people in the world would be African, not even of African descent, but African. And then, so a youthful population is anything that would attract you towards Africa. Number two, the rapid urbanization and innovation. And we're looking at different hotspots in terms of urbanization and development and innovation. Look at Nairobi, Kenya. Look at Lagos in Nigeria, Kigali in Rwanda, Johannesburg in South Africa. Those are centers that are attracting investors globally because of the potential that they hold. And that's just to name a few. Every African country is currently, advancing very rapidly in innovation and urbanization. Okay, number three, the vast natural resources. Of course, this should have come first. And in my small analysis, Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral resources. 30% are held up in Africa. 60% of arable land. If we're talking about food production, good quality food production, we're talking about 60% of arable land, land that can be farmed, being found in Africa. How much food would that produce, and how much power would Africa amass for itself once all of this land is being put under meaningful food production? It would actually be, holding all the food supplies in the world. And then 13% of global oil reserves are in Africa. 13%. And even though we are probably trying to move away from crude oils, the slow shift from maybe uh, crude to renewable sources means we still have an immense need for, oil and oil reserves. So Africa still holds a good position, a good potential position in terms of, the oil um, production, oil and oil products. And then number four, we have, and I have to talk about this, the consumer market, the untapped consumer market. We are talking currently of a population over a billion and a half, 1.5 billion people residing in Africa, if not for anything. I think, thinking from an economical perspective, that's a huge market for any product that is of good use, that you want to sell. You know, having such a huge population in one mass of land is probably the best market anybody would get out here. Also, let's talk about the number five, the strategic geopolitical importance of Africa. Now, everybody is rushing to align with Africa, militarily and economically, because look at the geographical location of Africa. To one side, we have the Indian Ocean that can connect Africa to the Middle East, to China and India and Japan, and as far as Australia. Then to the west, we have the Atlantic Ocean, which means that could be the connection between Africa and North American continent, as well as South American and Central American continents. And then as well as to the north, we have the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. The Red Sea, of course, connecting to the Middle East, and the Mediterranean Sea, a very, very important global route connecting Africa to Europe. Look at that position militarily and economically. Someone would tell you this: Africa holds the keys to world's success. Now, and my sixth point is diaspora and power reconnection. Very important. We are talking about the year of return. You know, all black people now coming to a realization that the globe, the then black people outside of the African continent and even inside of the African continent have realized that once we unite together, once we start looking into our African ancestry and become a unit, then that is when we can command respect. And I often say, uh, until Africa is respected, then other black people around the world in different parts of the world would not get the respect they deserve. And when Africa gets to be respected first, Africa as a continent and as a people, black people, then all black people around the world will enjoy those privileges of respect, of being attached to Africa. Now, when we talk about the reconnection of the diaspora, look at how much black people are now moving or contemplating moving back to the continent of Africa. That in itself means a lot, because it means all the resources those people carry with in terms of human resource, all the monies that they're going to, I mean, it's going to benefit Africa big time, big time. Now we have the year of return, say in Ghana, where they were, uh, allowing black people from around the world to relocate back to Africa. We have a president like Ibrahim Traore, who is currently, like, the icon of black unity in the world. Trying to tell black people to unite as far as those outside of the continent of Africa, and opening doors for them to come home, restart life here, and invest in Africa. That is going to mean unity, and a unity of purpose for black people means that black people would not be challenged easily anymore. And then we have finally the shifting narrative. And we talk about when we talk about this shifting narrative, we're talking about Africa and Africans retelling their own stories, telling their own stories from their own perspective, saying who is their friend and who is their enemy, not relying on whitewashed mainstream media anymore, using platforms like this and many others to tell our own stories and to embrace our own Africanness, on blackness across the world. When the narrative shifts like this, when we are able to tell our stories, we are able to learn and teach each other, then it's over for imperialistic relationships. Yeah, that is what I had for you in this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you have something to share with me. Leave me a comment right below, and if you like this video, of course, give it a thumbs up and share this video as well. But most importantly, I seek for your support to this small channel, and the best, easiest way you can do that is by subscribing to this channel right away. Yeah, so with that said and done, we can leave it at this point, and I'll be happy to see you in the next video. Peace out and one love.